Frederick Drew Gregory. In 1984, I had the honor of becoming the first black American astronaut to pilot a NASA space shuttle.
Good evening and welcome to For the People. One of the main tools that African Americans have used to improve our socioeconomic condition is education. While many African Americans are concerned about why Nzinga and Femi can't read, a growing number of African American parents are concerned about whether any of the books their children are reading are culturally relevant. Why should we call ourselves African Americans? Our guest is the person who suggested the name change in a meeting with the Reverend Jesse Jackson and other African American leaders. Our guest is Dr. Ramona Edelin, President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Urban Coalition. Before her tenure with the National Urban Coalition, Dr. Edelin was founder and chair of the Department of African American Studies at Northeastern University in Boston. She has taught at Brandeis University, Emerson College, and the European Division of the University of Maryland. A Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Fisk University, Dr. Edelin performed undergraduate work at Harvard University, earned an MA degree in philosophy from the University of East Anglia in Norwich, England, and a PhD in philosophy from Boston University. With brains like this, she must have South Carolina roots.
I'm pleased to say that I do indeed, Listervelt. My grandparents and great-grandparents came from Chester and Orangeburg, and I have family still in Lancaster, my uncle and his family.
And you said you picked cotton down in
I did, on my granddaddy's farm.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
How much?
One bale, exactly.
Maybe we should begin by asking you to tell us something about the National Urban Coalition.
Okay. Listervelt, the National Urban Coalition was founded in the flames of the urban riots in 1967. 80 cities were in flames. And big business, organized labor, big city mayors, as well as civil rights and neighborhood leadership came together in an emergency convocation, which was convened by A. Philip Randolph and Andrew Heiskell, who was the chairman of Time Life Incorporated at that time, to look at cities as cities, really for the first time. It's a curious thing about the United States. Even though it's heavily urbanized, most people have paid no attention, or had not until that point in time, paid any attention to the effect that federal and state policies were having on cities. Highway policy, tax policy that was taking people out to the suburbs and disinvesting the inner cities. But when they erupted in flames, people said, wait a minute, we better look at these cities and look at both their problems and their potential together. And so coalition for us is truly a formula for representation of those various sectors who have a vested interest in what goes on in America's cities.
How has the focus of the National Urban Coalition changed over the years?
It's changed drastically. As you probably recall, when the cities were in flames, there was a front page article in the New York Times with all the magnates of the major multinational corporations praying over our cities and vowing to get to the root causes of all the problems in the cities and not to leave until all these problems were resolved. Needless to say, 3 years later in 1971, when our late President M. Carl Holman became the first African-American president of the organization, that interest had dissipated, the flames had died down. Our historic partners, some of them went to other interests, such as the war in Vietnam, which was a pressing issue at that time. And so it was really Mr. Holman who changed the coalition's focus from policy on Capitol Hill and phone calls from CEO to CEO dealing with pressing issues of their own survival, to give it arms and legs and hands and feet out in the cities around America. He developed the affiliated network. He developed programs working together with the same coalition sectors in economic development and urban health, urban education, which has always been a key concern of ours, housing, and other such. So we moved from policy per se and in and of itself to a much more programmatic, let's get in there and do something about these problems together kind of a mode.
You have been looking at the educational process in which African American students, children, are engaged. Would you tell us what you have seen?
The coalition from its inception has been vitally concerned with the whole business of education, job readiness, and what was affecting the youth who were disaffected and the people in the communities who were disaffected during the riots. To free up the potential in the cities, to develop the potential in the cities has been a historic concern. What we have seen, particularly in the last 2 decades, during the life of this organization, unfortunately has been both an increase for certain members of our group because of affirmative action and the doors that were open, particularly for higher education in that arena, and then the widening gap between within our own group, the haves and the have-nots, so that today we have an alarming, a staggering number of young people for whom the educational system simply is not working. I would even go so far, Listervelt, as to say they are criminally neglected within the school systems at this point in time.
Many people would say that the American educational system is not only failing blacks, but whites, Latinos, and others. What is unique, or is there anything unique about the failure of the system in terms of the African American student?
The system is not working well for most students of whatever racial or ethnic background. If there are, in fact, millions and millions of illiterate Americans, the vast majority of them white, who have come through the same public school systems, the system is not working well for anyone. I think, though, we are, that old word, vastly and disproportionately suffering from the results of this system in the schools now. And I have specific challenges to bring to public education, which is where the vast masses of our children are and will be. You can't give up on the public education system, but you can talk specifically about it. One thing, we have no longer got a notion of education growing from the ground up, from the masses of the people, about their own lives and what goes on in neighborhoods and communities relative to people. It's sort of a top-down, very much paternalistic and Eurocentric approach to education, and it's not working. It's not working at the lower levels in the grades, and it's not working at the higher levels, unfortunately, right now. As you know, I'm sure, the United States is no longer competitive with most of the nations in the world, particularly in math and science, and that's all students, not just our children. But we are disproportionately affected by that. There are just far too few of us. I think we had actually one PhD in physics to come out last year, just one in the whole nation.
Nationwide?
Just one.
Is there racism in the classrooms of this country, and what form does it take?
There's definitely still racism in the classrooms of this country, and it takes all of the subtle and overt forms that we have always known since our enslavement in this land and more. Because we both have children. We know that the children today are more visually sophisticated than any group of people probably the planet has ever known. A chalk and a blackboard, a book, a tablet and a pencil will not bring out what there is within these children any longer. We're not trying to do innovative things that are rooted in what we know, the tried and true, to reach and teach our children. One of my great passions is to untap the genius and the talent that resides within these children. Their genius is in the streets, on the ball fields, in the recording studios, and then they're functional illiterates in the classroom. Why? This is a real serious question that I have personally been engaged in for more than 20 years now, both in higher education and now at the Coalition. But the racism is in the textbooks. It's in the very structure of the language that we bring to this. I know you have had our brother Malefi Asante on the program. It is in, most particularly, and I don't know how I can state this strongly enough, the power of expectations. The research has shown for more than 50 years now that there's only one direct corollary to the performance of a child in school, and that is the expectation that the teacher and the family and the community, society around that child has of that child. Right now, our children have such dwarfed perceptions of themselves. They are treated almost like criminals and prisoners in our school systems, and they can't hope to emerge from that, and much of that is racial.
Why do you think they have this dwarf perception, as you say?
We have not figured out how to test teachers and administrators in public schools just as seriously and rigorously in the area of their expectations of our children as we do in subject matter content, or we purport to in subject matter content, for example. If I were asked to design a teacher test, one that said you are suitable to teach children and you are not suitable to teach children, the first criterion that I would use would be the genuine perception that that person has of that child. Listervelt, children know how you feel about them. They know when they are not looked at, when you don't make eye contact. They know when Susie over here misses a question and the teacher says, "Oh, come on, Susie, you can do better than that. Now, what did we say yesterday? How did we arrive at such and such?" And Susie begins to piece it together, and eventually she gets the right answer. "Wonderful, Susie, you did a wonderful job." Whereas Listervelt gives a wrong answer the first time. Teacher just turns around and goes over here and calls on somebody else. Listervelt knows that he is being treated differently, that the expectation of him is not the same. Now you compound that by tracking and other really, frankly, vicious forms of denying our children access to education, which still persists. And there's no mystery about why they don't feel that they're welcome and they are celebrated in that environment as they should be.
While all educational systems, the educational system of all societies are culture-bound, how do you think racism has impacted on the demand for multicultural education?
Racism has impacted on the demand for multicultural education in several ways. Number one, many of us don't know we need multicultural education even within our own group. And many of the teachers who have low expectations of our children are African American. And in their case, it is both a lack of self-knowledge and I think in some cases some class differentiations that people want to make.
What do you mean there?
Well, Listervelt, if I'm talking to a group of school teachers and I ask them frankly, you have two children who come up to you on an airplane, not in a classroom, but in a neutral environment like in travel. One is a pretty little girl who is well-groomed, pretty dressed, well-spoken, alert, makes eye contact with you immediately, doesn't necessarily engage you in conversation, but responds with more than a yes or no answer when you try to speak to her. What do you expect of that child? If, on the other hand, a little boy sits next to you and he's ragged, maybe he even has an odor, he's unkempt, he is afraid to make eye contact with you and will go to great lengths to turn away from you. He may have a nick in his head, which you may assume came from his being in a fight. In fact, he could have been abused. You don't know what has happened to that child. What do you expect of him? These are class issues. One obviously comes from a home where there's some resource base. The other does not. And to the extent that we, in this culture, even ourselves, set and establish our expectations for the children based on such factors as that, and you have a whole classroom of such children. Maybe even now, as some of our teachers are reporting from a kindergarten class, children who are crack addicted in the school systems because they were born with the problems of their mothers. There is something that takes over you, even if you're one of us. But I think the answer to that is self-knowledge and some of the other developmental tools that we'll talk about as time goes on, because it's a very serious issue. It is not separate and apart from racism totally, but it is another dimension which has to do with class.
And it existed before so-called desegregation.
I'm not sure that it existed on the same level.
Same level,
before
right, not the same
desegregation.
level, right.
No, but I
it
think it
existed.
did exist
Yeah.
before, yes,
Yeah.
in the sense that there have always been some of us for whom if you were not proper and so forth, you just regarded a little differently. Means and words like that, particularly out of the South, I'm afraid, do have some holding power with some of us.
Well, you know, when I was coming up, we had to do this code switching.
Yes.
You know.
Depending on with whom you were speaking.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Former Education Secretary William Bennett and others have been attacking the effort on the part of some African Americans to include as a part of the core curriculum African studies. What do you think are the great issues in this whole debate?
As it turns out, Mr. Bennett and I have had this debate before education, before drugs are, before education, back when he was in the humanities and was head of the National Endowment on the Humanities, and I was a state humanities chair. Mr. Bennett, like many who have been trained in a strictly European-focused mode at the higher levels, only respects the classics. And for him, the classics mean the European classics, going back to Greece and coming up through, you know, what we all learned in school, right up through the Renaissance and into to Shakespeare and so forth. He really, truly, I believe, has no regard for other modes of learning and for other cultures and what they have offered to the world. It's a serious problem, and it's one which will have to be changed. Now, President Bush has come out. He came out in the at the Republican convention, and again at his first speech before the joint houses of Congress, he said that this nation must leave that, and I think I'm quoting him, old tired baggage of racial bigotry and prejudice behind. Mr. Bush is looking at the demographics. He sees that at least 40% and possibly as many as 50% of all college-age young people, and therefore entry-level workforce young people, will be African-American and Latino in 1995. That's nearly half the workforce.
Say that again now.
At least 40% and possibly half of all college-age young people in 6 years in 1995 will be African-American and Latino young people. That means there is a day in sight when the majority is no longer the majority and the minority is no longer the minority. Mr. Bush says we will not be one whole competitive nation going into the 21st century unless we can't afford this business any longer. Now, what he says and what he does are two different things, and we expect him to do something about that situation if in fact he sees it clearly. But my point is, Mr. Bennett may not see that yet. Certainly at the time when he had no regard for anything other than the classics and that approach, he did not.
Do you think President Bush, in making the statement that he made, was saying that he was for a more expanded curriculum?
Well,
or was he just talking technology and the math and...
What we have to do when people say things like that, and the door is open, we have to define what it will take for us to be productive. I'm at the point, Listervelt, and I know, many of us are. If every European or every person of European lineage vanished from the face of the earth tomorrow morning, what would we do? My answer to the question of preparing half the workforce and stop thinking of ourselves as a minority and being prepared to do any and everything that the world requires is for us to do our own positive thing, and and we will be getting into some of the dimensions of that. I don't know whether Mr. Bush sees or intends that or not, but I know that if we do, and if we know what the development of our group entails, then we had better be about seeing to it that that happens. Hopefully we will have the help of the federal government and the private sector in these initiatives, particularly for public education and higher education. But that remains to be seen, and my point is, with or without that help, there's a job that we must do.
Let's talk specifically more about the curriculum and what that curriculum should look like, and how you think this curriculum issue will play out?
Okay, the curriculum is one issue, and it's a very important issue, but there's another issue that attends that. And if you don't mind, I'd like to couple those two. There is no question that no top-down, paternalistic, Eurocentric curriculum is going to fulfill the needs of children of color as they prepare themselves for the 21st century. It simply will not do. It does not suffice for European American children, as I've already indicated. I taught children at the largest university in this private school, university in this nation, nearly 20 years ago. The vast majority of them were white, and they could not read and write adequately. They did not deal with higher order thinking skills and critical reasoning the way that they could have and should have done then. So I know that things have changed since that period of time. That approach that does not draw from the masses of men their own life experiences will not, it withers, it dies. It looks elite and pretty, particularly when your propaganda can just make it so exclusive and so desired by so many people. But it shrivels and dies. It cannot live. So there's that level. But beyond the cultural content and the historical truth that has to be told through the curriculum about all the world, which begins in Africa and then proceeds forward. There's also a question of how you teach. I've often told the children, you can say anything to anybody, but it depends on how you do it, whether it's going to be effective or not. And this is another major problem, because in addition to the structure of the language itself, European cultural hegemony, which dominates the curriculum and the textbooks and what's supposed to be true. In addition to that, we have a style of teaching, if you will. I don't prefer the word style, but that is the term of art right now, learning style and instructional style. We do not learn well, and I would submit that no one does, but we certainly do not. People of color certainly do not learn well in a strictly lecture classroom, with an authority figure standing at the front of the room and 40 children just sitting down for 50 minutes at a time while somebody talks at them and occasionally tosses out a question like a hand grenade. The kind of environment that is conducive to our learning is a hands-on, inquiry-based, discovery learning methodology, particularly our boys. It is almost criminal. In fact, I would say it should be criminal to have our boys seated in a chair 50 minutes per class, class after class after class, never having the opportunity to get up, put their hands on anything. Another component of a productive learning environment, besides the expectations, which are number one, is that it should be a cooperative rather than a competitive learning environment. When we were in school, if I were to talk to you about this word problem and try to ask you, well, Listervelt, what does this mean to you? How would we apply this in our everyday lives? What do you think this might mean if we were actually going to use it for something? Or, God forbid, if I were to look on your paper and see how you started to formulate something, we would probably both be put out of school for cheating.
Right, exactly.
But the thing is that children need to discourse. They need to apply what they're learning. They need to be a part of an environment that encourages their interactive thinking process through these things, particularly children who do not come from a middle-class background, do not go to work with their mamas and daddies and see the workplace for themselves, do not have a chance to see local celebrities or role models in the disciplines that they are studying every day over the dinner table. These children need opportunities to sort out what this means. Right now, very few of them see any relationship between what they learn in school and what goes on in the outside world, which is one of the big interconnects that hasn't been made. Moreover, a cooperative learning environment takes you out of that old bell curve mentality where in order for me to make an A, you have to make a C. In this classroom, we're all on a team. We're all on the same team. We may compete in a friendly way with someone else down the street, but in here, our attitude is we're all going to make it. We're all going to succeed, and we're going to work on this set of problems until each and every person in here can excel and achieve in that. And there's another key to that outside of the classroom, which is very important. Turns out from 2 recent studies, one from California and one from Massachusetts, the single defining characteristic for the Asian students who excel so much, particularly in the technology areas, are the study groups that they form after school. And this is the cooperative learning environment, the team spirit, the adult leader who takes them through what they've done that day, makes sure that everybody has it. When they go back to class the next day, they're ready. They know they're ready. This is missing in the lives of our children.
But this culture is so caught up into individualism. How do you think people will be able to break through that?
Individualism is a cruel lie. I will be as blunt as I can be about this. And I think Du Bois said it very well when he said, the history of the world is a history of races, groups, not individuals and not nations. We are in an environment that pretends, and here's where the language structure and the whole set of expectations tells again. It pretends to be about rugged individualism, but in fact, groups emerge or do not emerge. There is one reason why the whole African group en masse cannot rise up right now, and that is, as a group, we are discriminated against, which is not to say we don't have a few brilliant entrepreneurs and others who can rise to the surface. But the reason that we are concerned about the uplift of the masses of our people still in 1989 is that we as a group defy the myth of the ethnic queue. Everybody else may have been able to step up that way. We have not, and there are reasons for that have to do with our identity as a group. We must get away from that individualism thinking, which is not to say that the individual's rights and talent and genius are not to be cherished and developed. But it's developed how? In a context.
Next tonight, we look at one of the most vigorous internal debates in the black community in the past 2 decades. It's the issue of changing from black to African American. It had only been 22 years since the last major name change had occurred. It happened just after a white racist shot James Meredith, the first black graduate of Ole Miss. The shooting occurred on a southern highway as Meredith was leading a voter registration march from Memphis, Tennessee to Jackson, Mississippi. It so enraged student activist Stokely Carmichael that as he emerged from a Greenwood, Mississippi jail where he had been held for his voter registration work, the first words to emerge from his mouth were, "Black Power." It was the beginning of a major new phase in black confidence and self-assertion that captured the imagination and stirred the consciousness of black people all over the world. Now, according to some polls, a majority of black people have said they prefer the term African American. But the issue is far from settled.
I prefer to be called African American because African American reflects the true nature of my cultural heritage.
And I think it's better for you to be called black. You know, that it's different black. There's black Africans. There's black West Indians, you know. Black is beautiful, that's what I have to say.
I'm an American, whether I'm a black American or what, don't make any difference. I'm just an American.
You had the caucus in the election, they kept calling him Greek American, so being that every black person over here has African heritage, you know, it should be called African American.
Editorials in both black and white publications generally supported the call to use African American. The New York Times called it healthy archaeology, arguing that blacks may now feel comfortable enough in their standing as citizens to adopt the family surname American, and their first name, African, conveys a pride in cultural heritage that all Americans cherish. Said the Chicago Defender, as the world continues to shrink, Americans who speak to their Africanness with the African American title will likely find the cultural, education, and economic relationship with others much smoother. Opinion also varied among the guests we interviewed in our special Black History Month series.
I always thought that Afro-American or African-American was the appropriate designation. And there is some beneficial effects in acknowledging the reality, the African heritage and the American presence. But that's not the critical issue. The critical issue is gaining power.
I believe that it is important for us as a people to think that we are connected to the world, because the African diaspora was for real. We were sent to different parts of the world.
Well, naturally, it's our heritage, but all of us here are really educated and exposed to American life, so is that we really are, we have to dig back for this ancestry. I mean, I'm not an African.
It's a very complicated question. So rather than argue over it, let's not give up black, let's not give up Africa. So in all the work that I do, the essays I write, I use both interchangeably.
For more on the story, we turn now to 4 other people with different views. Kwame Toure is an organizer with the All African People's Revolutionary Party, a group attempting to politically unite African people living in 113 countries all over the world. It was his call for black power in 1966, when he was known as Stokely Carmichael, that catapulted the term black into popular usage. Leon Wynter is a copy editor for the Wall Street Journal, and last week wrote an article that appeared on the journal's op-ed page called "This African American Still Feels Black." J. Bruce Llewellyn is a businessman who owns the 8th largest Coca-Cola bottling company in the country. He also owns television station WKBW, an ABC affiliate in Buffalo. Ramona Edelin is president of the National Urban Coalition. She proposed the name change at the Chicago meeting of black leaders last December. And to you, Ms. Edelin, the current initiative is largely your brainchild. Why is it important to use that term and not black?
Charlayne, we have an opportunity to renew values such as mastery and learning, the importance of the family, unity, which is of the utmost importance right now, at a time when our children couldn't be in more distress and turmoil, when we face a new century, and it's up to us to be sure that the problem of the 21st century is not also the problem of the color line, as Du Bois prophesied in 1903 this century would be.
But how does how does African American affect all of that?
Well, we see, going back to African cultural ties, to the land base that is our mother, as crucial in this process. And what I'm hoping is that we can recreate some of the spirit of the movement years, particularly for the children, by going back to values which were stripped systematically from us, as we all know, when we were enslaved for 250 years in this nation.
Mr. Wynter, you don't want to change from black.
No, well, I don't disagree that it is important for us to be cognizant of where we come from and the depth of our history that began before slavery. I just don't see the particular need in calling for renewal of the movement to leapfrog over the 400-odd years of history and of proud accomplishments that we can point to and indeed need to reacquaint our children with here in this country first. So I believe that it is important to teach the children and to, in general, imbue Black America with a knowledge of where it comes from, but to focus this effort on claiming what is ours here as Americans, which is the country that we are citizens of and where we pay our taxes.
Mr. Llewellyn, you prefer the term American.
Well, I guess in all of my years on this earth, I've been called about 5 or 6 different things. I've been called black. I've been called Afro-American. Now we're talking about African-American. I've been called Negro. I've been called colored. And what strikes me as a continuous theme or theorem in all of this is the fact that we never have been called full citizens of the United States of America. And what I'd like to see accomplished once and for all is that we are considered as full citizens and have all the rights and privileges there too. All I see is that people in Russia, people in Poland, people in Nicaragua are all packing their bags and heading for the United States of America, feeling it's some kind of panacea or a great place to be, and there must be something here that brings all these people. All I'm saying to you is that I think it's a disgrace that we have been here for well over 200 years and we have not enjoyed these full benefits that a lot of people have come here generation after generation and gotten. And I think that's the key, that's where we ought to go. I'll be very honest with you, if I had my druthers, I wouldn't be worrying so much about whether you call me African American or not. I would like very much to see throughout this country, as other groups have put in museums called Holocaust, to see slavery museums. Museums which would show our suffering, our contribution over the years up until the year 1989 as to what we have done to give something to America. I think to try and leapfrog back and take youngsters in 1989 and tell them about our agrarian background in Africa is almost impossible at this point in time. The other problem with this is I listened to one gentleman on the thing say, well, during the campaign we talked about Michael Dukakis as being a Greek American. Well, Greek American pinpoints a country called Greece. African American does not pinpoint any country. It is a continent. And therefore, either you're going to play a game called European American or African American, or otherwise, again, we still haven't been able to refine ourselves down to where we come from, whether we come from Nigeria or Kenya.
All right. Well, let me just go to Mr. Toure here. In the 1960s, as I said before, you were one of the ardent proponents of using the term black. How do you feel now about abandoning it in favor of African American?
Well, I do not even use the term African American. I use the term Africans because that's what we are. We're Africans in America. There's nothing American about us. Our history has only been a history of struggle in America. We are the only ethnic group in America who have to shed our blood to make reform. To get the vote, we must shed our blood. To get our children to school, we must shed our blood. To get on a bus and sit where we want, we must shed our blood. To even get in a filthy 5 and 10 cent store, we must shed our blood. So I don't see how we could be American. We're Africans in America struggling against American capitalism. And only until it's destroyed will we enjoy the rights that everyone else is speaking of.
Well, how do you respond to that, Mr. Llewellyn?
Well, what he's trying to do is to change the name of the game or change the rules. And I haven't got time to change the rules. I've got to look at what is. I guess I'm more practical about this. Maybe the ideal panacea is to change the rules and make it all a kind of a equal socialistic state. But in the meantime, let's talk about what is. This is a capitalistic society. We are here. We are paying our taxes. We are doing work each and every day. And I think we have the right to participate. We have sent people to war since the revolutionary times and spilled our blood for America, from Crispus Attucks and the Revolutionary War all the way down through this Vietnam. So therefore, I want to get what you can construe as my piece of the action like everybody else has gotten. And it really annoys me to see people who haven't made this kind of contribution over the years come here and feel that they can claim it and get it. And we have done that.
You have a response, sir?
Of course. In the first place, just because we're in just because we're in the capitalist system doesn't mean we must love it. We were made slaves. It doesn't mean that while you're a slave, you must love slavery. A conscious slave, while picking cotton on the plantation, is thinking about how to escape, how to bring freedom. Therefore, just because we're in capitalism doesn't mean we must enjoy it. We have to fight for an equal society. That's our history. Our people show that we spill blood instinctively to advance humanity. And we have this responsibility to advance America, yes, to a socialist state.
You would seem to imply from your comment that capitalism is utterly inconsistent with Africa and Africans.
It is.
But I would posit that that's not true. If you look again at the nations of Africa, if you look at African people in every country of the world, especially in recent times, they essentially want things. They want products. They want the things that it's, at least up to this point, demonstrated that only capitalism, with its imperfections and with its inequities, which hopefully some people believe can still be tamed, people want things. And I don't somehow see a worldwide Pan-Africanism as also spelling the death knell for capitalism at the same time. It seems inconsistent. There are too many people who want cars in Lagos, Nigeria, last time I checked. The traffic jams are horrendous.
I don't think we can solve that one right now, but let me just go back to Ramona Edelin, because both Mr. Wynter and Mr. Llewellyn talked about how they don't think it's possible to leapfrog over a lot of history and go back. It's impossible to go back to the agrarian life, that you can't even pinpoint a place in Africa where black people come from, if I'm paraphrasing your comments correctly. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, our culture and heritage in Africa entail far more than agrarian economies. Mathematics and science were born in Africa, philosophy and religion. And as well as that, we've been accomplished musicians and dancers for centuries. There's so much in our cultural heritage that we need to recoup right now, particularly for the children. And it is possible to leapfrog, as they put it. As a matter of fact, it's not only possible, it's necessary. Because if you begin with slavery, then you will still have children looking in your eyes as they do in mine, in our cities and in the streets, and saying, what difference does it really make to you, to me, or to anyone else, whether I live or die, whether I take drugs, whether I kill another person, whether I learn anything in school? We have a responsibility. And I think that one way we can have a cultural renaissance is to identify with the land base that gave us the wonderful things about our nature and our culture.
Mr. Llewellyn?
Well, that all sounds very nice and wonderful, but I invite you to take a look at Africa right now and today and look at the situation in Eritrea against Ethiopia and all the other things that have happened, Biafra with the Nigerians and what have you. That, in my opinion, is idealistic and not the gut of the problem. The gut of the problem is something called values. The gut of the problem is something called family. The gut of the problem is something called importance. What do we construe and believe to be important?
I would submit that without a cultural offensive, without our unifying at this particular time and saying what we believe in and who we are and how we will train our children and what our families mean to us, that we will continue to have those same gut issues. That's precisely the point. We will continue unless we develop a cultural vehicle which will move us forward. All groups move forward by strength of their culture. It is a myth that individuals move forward. And certainly we cannot accept 2 or 3 of our group emerging year after year while the vast masses of us continue to go down. We have a responsibility.
Let me raise a point back to you, Kwame Toure. When you launched this move that resulted in black being adopted as the defining symbol for African American people, many people felt that it helped to purge them of all the negative feelings about themselves, that it really represented the first major psychological break. And you heard the woman in the tape talk about black is beautiful. I mean, that was the most positive affirmation of blackness by black people. What do you say to people now who say you simply cannot abandon the term that came to symbolize so much for black people?
Human progress does not stand still. It moves. We came here as Africans. One of the first organizations we had fighting for us is known as the Free African Society. The very first independent organization we had in this country was the church. It was known as the African Methodist Episcopalian Church. So from Africans, our oppressor has changed us to colored, to Negro, to this, to that. We understand it's a step. Coming to black had a powerful point, because the point was that we were oppressed because of this color of our skin, and this was racism. But this fight is not just a fight over the color of our skin. A fight for power is a fight for land. When Mr. Llewellyn speaks about power, he's talking about land. Our land is Africa. America is not our land. It belongs to the American Indians, and we have a right to stand and take a moral struggle with them. And we don't worry about people being for things. People want things is incorrect. The point is not to explain the world. The point is to change it. If the people want material things, then we have a responsibility to tell them that things more important than material things, like freedom.
Mr. Wynter?
Well, I can't claim to have been there, indeed, when black was coined, because I was somewhat in high school and I was on the listening end as, indeed, you were doing the talking. But it's always been my feeling that black was more than the recognition of where our blood comes from. It has a lot to do with the experience of people of color in a larger sense under colonialism, whether it was external colonialism, let's say in the Caribbean, or the internal colonialism that we had to deal with here in the United States, rather than simply a statement of Africa. Because the fact is, we have become more than simply descendants of Africa. We have created a lot of what America is in our own image. When you talk about this cultural-based offensive, I would rather see us claim American culture, which is not European culture. America does not mean white. American doesn't mean white. It means a combination of European and African and Asian and the rest of the cultures of the whole world. This is what America is, and if it denies the fact of what is African within it, then it is up to us to continue to assert that no, America does not mean white. America means a melting and a combination of things.
I think that's the point. We are saying African and American, and not everyone is willing to say American, and not everyone is willing to say African, but the point is we are trying to merge the two, and American society at this point in time does exclude the African reality. America is an African as well as a European invention. Well, we know that, but it isn't accepted widely as now.
Let me ask you this, Ms. Edelin. What is wrong? Hakeem Madabuti said a few moments ago that in his writing and everything, he's going to use both. I mean, is there a problem with using African American for those who choose to, and for those who choose to use black? No, I think we all will use both to a certain extent. First of all, it's going to be hard to break old habits that were very dear to us, and I certainly was along with Stokely in the days when the name was changed. But it is important to continue to draw the consciousness of our people to a set of values which were positive and productive for us. To call our mother's name is Africa. We are children without her if we leave that out, and I think that it's fair to say no one of us is satisfied with the status quo today. Well, it seems that Time magazine, in fact, has a piece on this week, and it says that for more than a century, descendants of freedmen have debated what name they should bear as a people, and in every instance, the shift in the change of appellation coincided with a new phase in the struggle for equality. Is that what's going on now, in your view, and what stage is this?
Yes, and I think this is a point of evolution in our culture, and it's the stage right before we cross the threshold to the 21st century. I think we are saying that there's a quickening of our will. We will not cross the threshold of the 21st century in the condition that we are today.
All right, let me ask Mr. Wynter, what do you think about that?
I don't necessarily see this as a quickening, if you will, in that kind of direction. It seems to me that a move like this is an attempt more at a rhetorical assertion to sort of put a new name on things. But I don't see where it quite takes us to getting a better handle on what is immediately in front of us.
Maybe I should say, Charlayne, that the cultural offensive is going to entail agenda setting, goal setting, working together to achieve our purposes. As you well know, Charlayne, in the movement years, when you decided to desegregate the University of Georgia along with Ham, we were unified around your decision. We were purposeful. We were powerful. There was a sense of destiny, and we achieved our goals. What we are so sadly lacking now is any sense of purpose or destiny. We are not setting agendas. We are not working together, though we're working very hard.
But is that because we don't have the right name?
Well, the name change is the first step in what we hope will be a self-conscious examination of our culture, going back to our ancient as well as our contemporary strengths, and pulling together a vehicle which will be more useful to us than the one that we are now engaged in. If anyone is satisfied with the status quo, I'm not aware of it, particularly our children.
Mr. Llewellyn, just very briefly, do you see this as a critical stage in the evolution of...
I swear, I do not know why people keep talking about what the container is called. It's what's the content of the container. This won't get us into the 21st century unless our kids can read, write, compute, and be able to compete in this country to make a living and to make progress. If that doesn't take place, we can put African American on them, we can put Negro on them, we can put anything you want to put on them, but they're not going to play the game in the 21st century because the field is getting tougher and tougher, and this not a level field.
Bruce says you know.
Wait, just a minute. Let me just we're about to run out of time. Mr. Toure, a final comment on that point.
The error of the thinking here is that most people think that Africans in America came here just like other immigrant groups did. All other immigrants came to America expecting a better way of life. We started in hell, which was a slave ship. and we're still in hell. This incorrect assumption makes it appear as if we've made a contribution with our culture. Our culture has been trampled upon, not the others. Any contribution we've made to America is the test of the strength of our culture in spite of this oppression. We are Africans, and that's exactly where we're going.
Is that going to, is the term, in your view, is that where you end it? Is that where it stops?
The content was African. The label has been changed to confuse us. If we came as Africans, how do we end up as Americans? How do we end up as...
I would beg to differ you that my ancestors came here in a slave boat. They didn't. They came from the island of Jamaica, and they came on their own because they thought it was a better place to be than Jamaica.
How did they get to Jamaica? They came as slaves to Jamaica. I was born in Trinidad. That's where the slave ship dropped them. We're all slaves. Right. We're all slaves.
We can't solve this one.
Jamaica, or who did you decide to drop in Jamaica? The white man dropped you in Jamaica and brought you to Mississippi. Right. So you don't define yourself by the enemy?
No, I define myself as the fighting places where I'm at. Where I used to be, or where I thought I was.
So if you were fighting on a slave ship, so if you're fighting on a slave ship, we fought on the slave ships. We fought on the slave ships. Did you call yourself a warder?
And you're still fighting in 1989, right here in New York City.
Until Africa is free, we won't be free.
All right, one final practical note. Mr. Wynter, you're the only editor here. How should the media deal with this? As you can see, there's a debate over the issue. What about newspapers, television, books, magazines? I mean, should they continue to use, Haki said he was going to continue to use both. I mean, what kind of guidance do you think should apply there?
Well, speaking immediately for newspapers, and again, while I don't represent directly the Wall Street Journal here, I can tell you that they have discussed this issue recently and concluded that they will wait and watch to take the general standard of what comes to be common usage among black people in general, as at least we'll call it now, and moreover among academics and political and social leaders and that sort of thing. And if a consensus appears to emerge, then style changes will probably be forthcoming at our paper. And I believe in fact the New York Times has said similar things, which is about all they can do, because to them it's, well, there's something going on there in the community and we don't really know what to make of it. All they want to know is that they really don't want to offend anyone in the end. If it becomes apparent that everybody wants this, then they'll likely go along, although they will use people of color in the media as sounding boards to make the decision.
Well, I'm sorry, we'll just have to wait and watch and see what happens because we're out of time. Ms. Edelin in Washington, thank you for being with us. Mr. Wynter, Mr. Llewellyn, and Mr. Toure.
Africans.